gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving each other. Whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, also should you. Beyond all these things, put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity.
I want to begin this morning with a quote that is frequently attributed to Mark Twain. It's this: "Kindness is the language which the deaf can hear and the blind can see." And I love this quote, and it is debated as to whether or not Mark Twain is actually the one who originated it. But what I love about this quote is it is so biblical, even though it's not an inspired author, and even though it's not appearing in the text of Scripture. The idea that we can communicate with people through kindness is absolutely biblical. Because as you journey through Scripture, you're going to see that kindness is one of those expectations that we embrace. And that's what we've been studying about for these past few weeks as we've been engaged in this examination of the fruit of kindness. In fact, we've seen and talked about the fact that as far as the definition of kindness, kindness is being good, benevolent, or considerate. That's the bare minimum definition of kindness. And a couple of weeks ago, we spent some time examining the concept of mercy from the Old Testament, because mercy is equivalent with kindness in the eyes of the Old Testament authors. We also spent some time a couple of weeks ago looking at an episode of kindness in the life of David, and how in the aftermath of King Saul's death, David made sure to show kindness to King Saul and to Prince Jonathan. But is that all we need to know about kindness? Do we need to know a definition, see one example, and move on? This morning, I want you to think about some of the verses that don't use the word kindness, but are obviously communicating kindness. Maybe you'll think about Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12, where Jesus said, "Whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets." Maybe you'll think about Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, where Paul instructed Christians to count others more significant than themselves, and to look not only to their own interests, but also to the interests of others. Or maybe you'll think about 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9, where Peter told us not to repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, to bless. You know what the commonality between all three of these verses are? The common theme, the overarching principle of these passages is that kindness involves putting others first. It's not just about being good. It's not just about being benevolent. It's not just about being considerate. It's about putting other people first. And that's really hard. It's really hard to put others first when we live in a world that teaches us to look out for number one. When we live in a world that has a restaurant whose motto is, "Have it your way." When we live in a world that believes in a dog-eat-dog mentality. But Jesus came to earth and demonstrated a different way of living. And in his different way of living, he called us, as we studied the first week of this particular series, to a different kind of kindness. And this morning, as we close out our study of the fruit of kindness, I want us to look at a story that never uses the word kindness, but provides us with one of the best demonstrations of it. So I'm going to ask you to turn in your Bibles to John chapter 2. And you may be aware that John chapter 2 features Jesus' first miracle, a miracle that took place at a wedding, a miracle that involved turning water into wine. And the thing is that most of the time when we investigate this story or talk about this event, we get distracted by the elements and fail to see the application. So I want to spend time with the first miracle of Jesus today, but I don't want to do so to make arguments about whether or not the wine was fermented or unfermented. I don't want to have a discussion about alcohol. I want to look at how kindness evidences itself in this miracle. But before we get to that application of it, let's just break down the basics of this particular event, this particular story in the life of Jesus. So you'll notice there in John chapter 2, verse 1 and 2, that we're told there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee and that Jesus was invited to the wedding. Does that seem odd to you? Does it seem a little bit weird that Jesus is going to a wedding? Sometimes when I encounter this story, I feel a little bit odd because that's such a normal activity. I mean, how many of you have been to a wedding in the past 3 months? Raise your hand. Enough. Weddings are so normal, such a piece of our life that we have to do from time to time. And I'm kind of not used to Jesus doing normal, everyday things. I mean, I know he did, but I'm so used to reading in the Gospels about Jesus traveling to Jerusalem for a religious event, or traveling to this or that town so that he can preach to them. I'm so used to reading about Jesus doing ministerial things, and yes, I may be a minister, but I'm not close to Jesus in the sense of what he accomplished. I mean, I try to be close to him relationally. Wow, I just put my foot in the mouth. But I do normal things. I'm not used to Jesus doing normal things or routine things or habitual things. And yet he's going to a wedding. And here's the thing you need to understand about first century Jewish weddings. Our weddings are, hey, we're going to get together for about 3-4 hours on a particular day of the week. We're going to watch the bride and groom be united in marriage. We're going to gather with them afterwards, potentially, have a meal, celebrate with them for a little while, and then we're going to go home. Now, in the first century, they liked their weddings a little bit more. They were events that could last as long as a week. Now, imagine if our social traditions required us to have weddings that lasted a week. We'd never get anything done. So Jesus is going to this wedding, this very normal event that could take multiple days. And don't negate the fact that Jesus is going here as a full participant. He's going there to celebrate the union of this man and this woman. He's going there to enjoy a feast. He's going there to visit with friends and family, more than likely. He's going there to honor the bride and groom and their families. He's going there to celebrate. But during the festivities, something happens. John chapter 2 and verse 3 tells us that the wine ran out. And Jesus' mother, in a roundabout way, asked Jesus to do something about it. And Jesus' response to her insinuation that he should fix the problem is this: what does this have to do with me? My time has not yet come. What does this have to do with me? Now, we may not say it that way, but we've certainly shared that sentiment before, right? Been in a situation where you're asked to do something and your thought process, maybe even your speech, communicates the idea of, what does this have to do with me? Why is this my problem? Some of us have even used the Old Testament variation of this. Am I my brother's keeper? We've been there before where we've wondered, why are you bringing this to me? Why do I have to deal with this right now? This is not my problem. This is your problem. And I don't think Jesus is being rude here. I think he's just being honest. What does this have to do with him? Now, it's obvious that Jesus' mother, Mary, knows something about Jesus that everybody else doesn't know. That's insinuated in this to some degree. And yet Jesus is hesitant to get involved. Now, he's not being disrespectful and he's not being self-absorbed. We know that because we know Jesus never sinned. So there's got to be more to what he's saying than what our culturally influenced ears hear. And I think you need to pay attention to the second part of that phrase in verse 4. My hour has not yet come. This is the first of 9 references to Jesus' hour or time in John's gospel. The first 3 references to his hour or his time all take place before the triumphal entry. The triumphal entry is that event when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey and initiated that final week of his life, that week that leads up to his crucifixion. The first 3 references to his hour or time take place before that triumphal entry, and they all indicate that his hour or his time had not yet come. There are 6 more references to his hour or his time that appear after that triumphal entry. And in those 6 instances after his triumphal entry, during that last week of his life, all those references are to the fact that his time had come. So as one author pointed out, the hour toward which everything moves is the hour of Jesus' glorification, which takes place through his death, resurrection, and exaltation. In other words, when Jesus says, my hour has not yet come, what he's communicating is that he's on God's timetable. That everything he's doing is for the mission he was sent from this point forward. And he didn't think it was time for him to get involved in a situation that could complicate his greater mission. You see, once he performs a miracle, the word is out. Once he does something that is supernatural, he's going to get all the attention. And if it's not yet time for him to garner that attention, then he might be compromising the end goal. And so he has that concern. He expresses that concern. But the next thing you know, there in verse 5, Jesus' mom turns to some servants and says, do whatever he tells you. Now that's a mother for you. She presents a dilemma to Jesus. Jesus responds without ever committing to it, never says he's going to help, never says he's going to do anything, and mom just turns around and says, do whatever he tells you. She's already made up his mind for him. That's a mother for you. But Jesus doesn't get upset at that. That doesn't bother Jesus. Her reaction to his non-committal response indicates that she not only knew Jesus could do something about this situation, but that he would do something about this situation. And it's the latter part of that that interests me the most. The fact that she knew he would do something. In verse 6 through 10 of John 2, you can see how Jesus instructed some servants to fill some nearby jars with water and then draw some of that water out and take it to the master of the feast, which they did. And upon tasting it, the master of the feast proclaimed how good it was. And at the conclusion of this story, John wrote in John chapter 2, verse 11, "This, the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him." You may have noticed that John referred to this event as the first of Jesus' signs. John preferred the term signs over the term miracle. And he applied this word, signs, not just to the water to wine miracle, but also to the healing of the nobleman's son in John chapter 4, the feeding of the 5,000 in John chapter 6, and the healing of the man born blind in John chapter 9. And in the case of this event, John says that Jesus manifested his glory. He, in other words, demonstrated that God was indeed with him. In other words, this sign or this miracle demonstrated that Jesus was who he claimed to be. And that's why his newly acquired followers from the first chapter, guys that included Peter, Andrew, Philip, Nathanael, and possibly John, that's why they believed in him. But let's go back. Let's go back to the fact that Mary not only knew Jesus could do something to resolve this issue of wine, but that he would do something. Because I think that's powerful in this passage. Because it tells us that there's some things we can learn about kindness from this wedding and from Jesus' involvement in it. First and foremost, I believe we can learn that kindness means involving yourselves in the lives of others. Okay, Mary believes Jesus will do something. She knows not only that he can, but that he will. Think back for a moment to why Jesus is at this wedding in the first place. We're told that he was invited. Now, at this point, he's not famous. He's not a celebrity. His miraculous abilities have yet to be disclosed. He hasn't revealed himself in any significant capacity yet. At this point, he has a handful of followers because his predecessor, John the Baptist, said, "Hey, you guys start following him now." He is an unknown at this point. So the bride and groom have not invited him because he's a big deal and they want somebody popular at their wedding. He's not invited because he's performed miracles and they want him there just in case something goes wrong, because something goes wrong at every wedding. No, he's there because he knows the bride and groom. It's quite possible that they're even part of his family. Some scholars have suggested that Mary's awareness of the wine problem is because she's functioning as one of the hostesses. She's functioning in some capacity in helping to put on this wedding. And so it's very possible that this is someone close to Jesus and his family. Whether it be relatives or friends, he's invited to the wedding, not because of who he is, but because of his relationship with the ones getting married. Jesus is here because he is somehow involved in the lives of the people who are getting married. One thing we need to understand about kindness is that to a large degree, kindness means getting involved in people's lives. Oh, you can be kind to someone you've never met before, to a stranger. Absolutely. But meaningful long-term kindness comes when you're involved in someone's life. And when something's going on, they can call on you. They know you'll be there to support them, to help them, to get them through whatever's going on. But even in the case of being kind to strangers, to some degree, you've got to know what's going on. Whether it be the individual standing on the side of the road with a sign declaring their poverty, or the person you see in public who's struggling to handle those rowdy children that they're with, or the person across the classroom or across the office who you can tell is just having a bad day. To some degree, you're involved. To some degree, you're aware that something's not right, something's going on, and they need help, or they need love, or they need someone to care. You may not be intimately involved, but you have to involve yourself. You have to take action in order for kindness to be communicated. Think about the parable of the sheep and the goats that's recorded in Matthew chapter 25, between verse 31 and 46. I'm not going to read the entire parable. You may want to read it yourself later if you've never heard it before. But in this parable, Jesus presents the expectation that his people, represented by sheep, that his people will feed the hungry, welcome the strangers, clothe the naked, and visit the sick and the imprisoned. The parable is intended to establish a contrast between the sheep who provide for the needs of others and the goats who fail to provide for the needs of others. But when you read the parable, the biggest difference between these two groups is not that one group helped people and the other didn't. The biggest difference is that one group was aware of the needs of others and the other wasn't. It was the sheep's recognition that people were hungry, thirsty, naked, strangers, sick, and imprisoned that caused them to act. And so an easily overlooked takeaway from this parable is the fact that the only way we're going to be able to be sheep is by being intimately involved in the lives of individuals and our community to the degree that we're cognizant of when needs arise. You have to be involved to some degree in order to be kind. It may just be your ability to observe what's going on, but you have to be cognizant. You have to be involved to that degree in order to reap the fruit of kindness. In this instance, Jesus was involved because he's invited to this wedding. Had he not accepted the invitation, he would not have been available to do anything about the situation. If we're going to produce kindness like Jesus, we've got to be involved. And that may simply mean we've got to be aware, looking, searching, cognizant of people who need an act of kindness. Not only that, but when we look at this event in the life of Jesus, I think it teaches us that kindness means allowing interruptions from people. Remember, Jesus went to this wedding via invitation. His mother comes up to him and informs him about this problem with wine. And Jesus, as we've already pointed out, says, "What does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." It sounds like he's being interrupted. At first glance, it seems like this is an annoyance or an inconvenience being placed on him. You ever been annoyed by interruption? Have you ever been in that situation where something comes up that is disrupting your day, interfering with your life, and it's just aggravating? Don't stare at me like you don't know what I'm talking about, because every one of us has likely had one of those moments. It could have been our spouse that interrupted us. It could have been our children. More than likely, it was our children that interrupted us. It could have been a friend or a neighbor or a spam phone call. Thank goodness our cell phones now tell us it's a spam call, so we don't feel the need to answer it. We've all had interruptions at some point in time. How do you handle those? Do you get angry? Frustrated? Does your life get stressful when interruptions occur? It's interesting to me because you can journey through Jesus' life and see multiple occasions when he gets interrupted. There's one time he's going to go heal someone's child. And a woman with a medical condition that caused her to bleed sees him going through town and is like, hey, you know what? If I can just touch his clothes, that will probably heal me. And she does so in a crowd of people. He feels the power leave him, and he stops what he's doing on his way to heal someone so that he can talk to this woman. He gets interrupted for such an amount of time that the child he's going to heal dies in the process. Of course, he ends up bringing that child back to life. Or you can think about when he's making the trip to Jerusalem and he's got to pass through Jericho and he's walking along the street and there's a short guy sitting in a tree and he stops his trip just to go have dinner with Zacchaeus. His life got interrupted a lot. But you know what's so beautiful? Here he is being interrupted by his own mom with a problem that's not his, and yet he ends up helping in the situation. He allowed this interruption. He didn't act like this matter was beneath him, nor did he ignore the situation because it wasn't part of his plans. No, he helped. He acted, even though it interrupted his life. This was a random act of kindness. And what I mean is that Jesus didn't go to that wedding expecting to perform a miracle. He wasn't there because this was the place he wanted to launch his ministry from. The wedding at Cana just happened to be one of those times when an opportunity presented itself for kindness to be acted upon. And Jesus seized it. Sometimes the reason we fail to be kind has nothing to do with our ability or our desire or our resources. Sometimes the reason we fail to be kind is just because we're too busy. Sometimes the reason we fail to be kind is simply because we don't want to be interrupted. But if we're going to be like Jesus, if we're going to embody a different kind of kindness, then we have to be willing to allow those interruptions. And we have to be willing to seize the opportunity. As Paul said in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone. Kindness means allowing interruptions from people. One final thought taken from this wedding at Cana episode is that kindness also means caring about people's needs and concerns. No matter how big, no matter how small those needs or concerns are, caring about them. Even though Jesus never technically agreed to help when his mother presented him with this dilemma, Jesus did. And I want you to think about this. What is Jesus doing? What is he accomplishing? He's turning water into wine because that's what's expected to be served at this wedding. What's the big deal if they don't have sufficient wine? What's the big problem? You know, throughout his ministry, Jesus performed many miracles. Some of those miracles would provide life-saving remedies to incurable medical conditions. Some of those miracles would rescue people from the crippling bondage of demon possession. And still others of those miracles would bring loved ones back from the dead. What would this miracle do? Is it curing a disease? No. Is it removing a demon? No. Is it bringing someone back from the dead? No. What would this miracle accomplish? It would spare the hosts and the bride and groom from the embarrassment of running out of wine. That's a big deal. Embarrassment. Saving people from embarrassment. That's the ultimate objective that this miracle would accomplish. Now, granted, I've been embarrassed a lot in my life. I'm a pretty good source of embarrassment for not only myself, but a lot of other people. Just ask my family, especially that one over there. Embarrassment can be crippling. But when you compare it to all the other miracles Jesus performed, this is so insignificant, and yet it's the first. It's such a minor deal in the grand scheme of things. If the wine runs out and Jesus does nothing, no one's life is ruined. No one suffers any tremendous consequence. Oh yeah, people might go home at the end of the wedding celebration and be like, I can't believe they didn't have enough wine. Did they not think this through? That was horrible. And within 1 month, they're going to forget about it. At the next wedding, they might bring it up again, but after 2 or 3, no one's going to remember this wedding. This is so insignificant. This is not a big deal. In the grand scheme of life, this doesn't matter. But it mattered enough to Jesus to still do something about it. I like the way one author described this miracle. He said, as far as emergencies go, this one falls well down the list. It caused embarrassment, to be sure. But need a Messiah who had come to heal the sick and liberate the captives concern himself with a social faux pas? No. At least, that's what we would think. Realize this. This isn't a big deal. But Jesus even cared about the little deals. Jesus is here, and in his kindness is still willing to do something to resolve a minor issue because he cares about the needs and the concerns of people that much. Have you ever resisted praying a prayer because you thought it wasn't a big enough deal to bother God with? Have you ever thought, I don't need to pray about this because this is a waste of God's time? We serve a God who knows the number of hairs on your head. I don't know how some knowledge could be any more insignificant than that. And I know He's always having to count less on me, but He still knows how many are there, even though it's fewer than it was a year ago. God cares even about the insignificant things. Jesus acted on something that did not matter in the grand scheme of things. This is the Son of God who's going to go to a cross to resolve mankind's greatest issue. And yet His first act of supernatural power is fixing an embarrassing drink problem at a wedding. Because He cared about people that much. Disciples have a tendency to be less concerned about other people than Jesus. It was the disciples who rebuked parents for bringing their children to be touched by Jesus, presumably because they viewed this as an activity that was beneath Him. It was the disciples who begged Jesus to send away a Canaanite woman who was requesting help for her demon-possessed daughter simply because she was annoying them. And it was the disciples who encouraged Jesus to send away the 5,000 plus member crowd when it got late in the day because they didn't want to be responsible for feeding that many people. Do we as disciples reflect the kindness of Jesus when we have a tendency to be less concerned about other people than He was? That's why Paul instructs us in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 12 to clothe ourselves or put on kindness. There are two things about this passage that are worth mentioning. First, the language indicates that kindness is a choice. You have to choose to put it on. You have to choose to clothe yourself with it. It isn't something that everyone automatically possesses. You have to make the decision that you're going to be kind. And this language indicates that kindness is an identifier. In other words, it associates you with God. Why are we to be kind? Because we are God's chosen people who are loved by Him. And so our display of kindness is one way in which we associate ourselves with God, because He's the originator of kindness. If we're going to model our lives after Jesus, then we must care about the needs and concerns of other people, no matter how big or how little they are. President Teddy Roosevelt once said, "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." That's why kindness, even in the smallest of matters, is so important. So let me ask you this morning. Is kindness your native language? If kindness can communicate with the deaf and the blind, as Mark Twain assumedly said, if kindness can break language barriers, is it your native language? See, the wedding at Cana was a random act of kindness by Jesus. If we're going to be like Him, shouldn't we be engaging in random acts of kindness? I pulled this image, this list, from Reader's Digest website because it was the best looking one I could find. I'm not endorsing Reader's Digest. I'm just saying where I got it from. If your native language is not kindness, maybe you should consider investigating some different ideas you can employ to communicate kindness randomly. Because if Jesus engages in random acts of kindness, maybe we should too. This morning, we're wrapping up this examination of the fruit of kindness. And as I said a couple of weeks ago, kindness might be the fruit that can open the door to someone's life with whom you can share Christ better than any other fruit that's out there. So don't overlook kindness. Let's all put it on before we leave here today. No act of kindness was greater than the kindness shown to you by the Lord when He went to the cross on your behalf. It's our job to pay that forward. This morning we're gathered here because of the kindness shown to us by Him. And we offer this invitation that if you're not experiencing His kindness, it might be time for you to turn to Him. It might be time for you to seek Him out. It might be time for you to surrender to Him. It might be time for you to put Him on in baptism. And if you're not expressing His kindness, it might be time for you to change. Whatever your need is this morning, we invite you to make it known to Him. If you need to respond to the invitation, we offer it now and invite you to make your way to one of these front rows while together we stand.